Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Armstrong Air and Space Museum here in beautiful Wapakoneta, Ohio. Doug Damon's my name, and we're here today to help celebrate 50 years of an anniversary of the lunar landing in July 20th of 1969. Neil Armstrong first had that dream as a young boy at age 6 years old by his very first flight at a grassy airfield near here. Where he was taken up on a Ford tri-motor airplane. Well, his dream eventually led him to land on the moon, to be the very first man to land on another planet. He was a fusion of man and science by the benefits that we have gained through space exploration. So Mr. Armstrong was kind enough to leave a museum for us to come and experience what it was like to land on the moon that day. So follow us as we take you inside and meet some of the nice people and get a chance to learn a little something about not only the mission that he was on, but the future missions that are yet to come. Thank you. Welcome back, folks, and thanks for staying with us as we've come inside the Armstrong Air and Space Museum here in beautiful Wapakoneta, Ohio. Greg Brown, an expert here at the museum, is going to take us throughout the museum at some of the most interesting displays celebrating the lunar landing, July 20th, 1969. Greg, thanks for taking the time.
Thank you, and we appreciate the opportunity.
Well, you've got beautiful displays here, and this museum opened when?
July 20th of 1972.
Wow. And now ever since then, you've been having people come from all over the world.
We do. We have people come from every corner of the globe, every part of our country, and we actually keep track with a map that's in the museum store. So people can kind of take a look and see all of those various places that are represented.
And you're conveniently located right off I-75. Maybe about 100 miles from beautiful Wyandotte, Ann Arbor. And so people can come in and see what inspired a dream of a young boy, Neil Armstrong, how it's resulted in great benefits for our society, all these space missions.
Certainly. So we're pleased to be able to provide these exhibits, artifacts, and we hope that this visit that people will make here will inspire them and educate them and cause them to appreciate what was accomplished.
Now, you're open throughout the entire year, or you have certain periods?
We are open throughout the entire year. During the school year, however, we are closed on Mondays. Otherwise, we're open 7 days a week.
And you have many school groups coming through, local educators, or some coming in from out of state.
Yes, we do. We have actually a lot of schools that bring their students through here in the state of Ohio, and then we have a few out-of-state schools that come as well.
Well, Greg, you're going to take us through the museum and some of the displays that will help educate us and inspire us as we move forward to a new year in space exploration over the next few years.
Certainly.
Great. Stay with us, folks, here at the Armstrong Air and Space Museum. Welcome back, folks, to the Armstrong Air and Space Museum here in beautiful Wapakoneta, Ohio. Greg, it's really been interesting, some of the displays that you've been taking us through, and for those folks that have been following the space program over the years. And Neil Armstrong had a unique experience in Gemini 8.
Yes, he did.
Him being a U.S. Navy pilot, flying 78 combat missions, almost shot down twice, prepared him for what was about to happen in this very capsule.
Certainly, he experienced several tense moments throughout his career, but this really was a test of his mettle. So on this mission, they were intending to rendezvous with an Agena target vehicle, dock with that vehicle, and then his co-pilot here, David Scott, was to do an EVA, get outside the spacecraft for about an hour and a half and do some work. Well, before they got a chance to get far into the mission, they had a control system anomaly. They had a thruster that developed a short, and it began to fire. And that started to rotate the spacecraft.
Very disorientating to many of the other astronaut, apparently, and he was able to get it under control and save the mission.
He was, but they were out of contact with the ground for the great majority of this crisis. So when you think about trying to solve a problem on your own, there's none of this, Houston, we have a problem. They couldn't ask for help because they were on their own.
And also the fact that a lot of these control panels, instrumentation led the way for our integrated circuit world that we have today into digital electronics. These were basically rudimentary machines testing these technologies, and it takes astronauts and former Boy Scouts like Neil, who was an Eagle Scout, wasn't he?
True, and interestingly enough, though, this spacecraft was equipped with an onboard digital computer. It had the capacity of about 64K memory, but it did have integrated circuits. They were just not quite what they are today.
Exactly. Well, folks, stay with us as we learn more about some of the amazing displays and technology results of the space program right here at the Armstrong Air and Space Museum. Folks, thanks for staying with us as we've kind of been walking through the museum with Greg Brown. We're seeing young potential astronauts of the future, and we've got one right here visiting the museum today with his family and grandparents. We've got Quincy, all here from the great state of Ohio today. Thanks, Quincy, for taking the moment. And we happen to see you enjoying some of the exhibits here today, right?
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about where you're from and how did you find out about this museum?
My grandpa told me.
He did, and he brought you down here.
Yes.
So this is a great thing for young men like yourself and your families, right?
Yeah.
Now, you think someday that you might like to be a person who helps discover things through science or mathematics?
No, not really.
No, not really. But you do like math.
Yeah.
Great. And maybe you will discover something someday. But nonetheless, it's nice having good folks like you come on down with your youngsters. And tell us a little bit, Neil, about how you found out about the museum.
I've seen it here since it was built. We've driven by it on I-75.
Yes.
Anywhere around Findlay, you could probably find it from anywhere around Findlay. I've been wanting to see it for a long time. And here we are.
Here you are. And you landed here, too.
Yeah.
Of course, you and I remember probably where you were on July 20th, 1969.
I remember watching the landing, and 69, I would have been 16. It's hard to tell. I might have been at my girlfriend's house.
Yeah, sure. And yes, I remember exactly where I was as well. And certainly people like Neil Armstrong are heroes, not only for people our age, but also for young men like Quincy as well.
Tremendous amount of courage to do what Armstrong and Apollo 11 did.
All those
And all the astronauts, for that matter.
And here we are in the 21st century, living the actual benefits of how them risking their lives with integrated circuitry,
Yes.
heart valves that are evolved from space shuttle fuel pumps, magnetic imaging, helping find cancer in people. All these technologies have spun from these early missions, and these people definitely are those that we should honor. Well, folks, this is a must-see museum. Bring your kids down. Grandparents, come on down. It's the 21st century, so we're looking to blast off to Mars right here at the Armstrong Air and Space Museum. Here we are, folks, and we've just landed on the moon. I'm just kidding you. We're here at the Armstrong Air and Space Museum in beautiful Wapakoneta, Ohio. Greg, you've done such an excellent job in taking us some of these beautiful displays, and we're learning so much about how the space program has resulted into new technologies for the 21st century. The spacesuit behind us was basically a replica of the Apollo 11 suit that Neil Armstrong wore on the lunar landing. And some of these technologies that is spun from this, being 300,000 miles away from Earth, trying to get a drink of water, fresh water, has got to be a real challenge. But this spacesuit has resulted in some interesting developments.
Yes, so as a matter of fact, in space flight, we have to drink water to hydrate ourselves, but we also have to use water to cool ourselves and our equipment. And that's where a lot of this technology comes in very handy. So for example, this is a water valve that was used in conjunction with the backpack that places water inside the suit into the underwear and actually circulates around the astronaut's body and removes heat from the astronaut's body. So that's very, very important as well. And then we also have to remove carbon dioxide, and that's with this valve here and this valve here. And we also have to have communications. Communications, biometrics, vital signs, very, very important also.
And as you mentioned, the three most important things to sustain life is fresh oxygen and fresh water. Here we are in the 21st century using some of the benefits of this process through water hyacinths that are used to help scrub bacteria out of water to give off new nutrients. The CO2 monitoring, the biomedical equipment advantages of being able to monitor those gases has helped result in digital ventilators today. So this spacesuit may very well have saved lives in the 21st century.
Well, it was very advanced for its time, and so we can see that it looks to some people a little bit archaic now compared to the new suits, but truly an advance in technology. And as you said, Doug, this really allowed kind of a foundation for the technology we have today.
And here we are getting ready for potentially another moon landing in what, 2023 or 24?
Yes. Yes, so SpaceX has a little bit shorter schedule than NASA ULA, but nonetheless, probably at the latest, we hope to have boots on the moon in 2024.
And here, back in 1969 on July 20th, there were only a couple nations involved in this race to the moon. Now we have 70 nations out throughout the world. They have their own space agencies, so things have really, really progressed. Stay with us, folks, here at the Armstrong Air and Space Museum. Well, here we are, folks, back here at the Armstrong Air and Space Museum. The Eagle has landed, that's for sure, huh, Jeff? We are here at the replica of the lunar landing module here at the museum, and it's interactive. Folks can actually experience what it's like to actually land on the moon through this interactive device. And tell us a little bit how those astronauts on that day had to utilize the equipment and control it.
Okay, so Neil Armstrong would be standing where I am, and where Doug is would be Buzz Aldrin. So it takes two men constantly monitoring the equipment. So they have two windows here, one for each astronaut, and you have a attitude control handle here, and you have the throttle and translation controller here. Neil Armstrong, when they started out on their landing procedure, actually were using the computer quite a bit. The computer directed them into a field of boulders. The boulders were some the size of automobiles, so he had to take manual control, and he had to translate or move in a straight line horizontally about 1,000 feet further down range. So he's using this for attitude, he's using this to control the thrust of the engine, and for translation, moving straight. Okay, so while he's doing that, Buzz is on the other side reading his 8-ball, which we don't have showing right here, and that shows the attitude, and Buzz is also calling out altitude and velocity changes. So Neil is flying the spacecraft, and Buzz is assisting him in a very critical manner.
Amazing. And when you think of what actually happened, where Neil had to take control because the actual coordinates seemed to be a confusion as to where to land. If you made a mistake, it could have been catastrophic. So he had to take control of the whole mission for those amount of seconds.
Yes, he did, and keep in mind, too, that at that same time frame, before they got to low gate, which is about 500 feet off the moon's surface, they had 5 program alarms. The computer was overloaded. That was telling them, hey, guys, I'm kind of busy right now. And also, they were getting fuel calls. They were getting a little bit low on propellant. Made for an interesting flight.
Indeed, and an expensive one as well.
Very expensive one.
Considering 1969, it was, what, $25.4 billion in cost. In today's times, in 2020, it'd be $154 billion. And within the next 2 years, as the next landing occurs, another additional $30 billion. So we're looking at close to $200 billion.
That's pretty pricey. I have, though, been interested in people's responses. Oftentimes they will say, well, why do we spend all that money in space? And the actual answer is we did not spend that money in space. We spent it in various communities all across the country. Many people had good paying jobs. A lot of communities got an economic boost. So that money really was spent here.
Exactly. It all comes back when you're doing something positive. Comes right back to the actual collective of everything.
5%. 185. Okay, 75 feet. Guys looking good. Down a half. 6 forward. 60 seconds. Lights on. 6. Down 2.5. Forward. Forward. That's 40 feet down 2.5. Picking up some dust. 30 feet, 2.5 down. Straight shadow. 4 forward. 4 forward. Drift into the right a little. 20, down a half. 30 seconds. Forward. Just. Good. Okay. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. ACA at a descent. Mode control both auto, descent engine command override off. Engine arm off. 413 is in. We copy you down, Eagle. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
In order to understand how Neil flew the LEM, we have to understand a little bit about attitude control, a little bit about translation. Those are terms that you may not be familiar with, but what we want to talk about is, first of all, attitude control. Attitude control is simply, if you think of my 3 fingers as being the axes of motion, this would be roll, rotation this way, this would be pitch, rotation this way, and this would be yaw, okay? That's 3 perpendicular axes of motion. If Neil wanted to do that, he would use this stick here and change the attitude of the spacecraft. Now, if we want to move in a straight line without rotation, we would move this way, which is positive X, this way, negative X, this way, positive Z, this way, negative Z, this way, positive Y, this way, negative Y. So that is called translation or maneuver. And this is how he would do that.
Here we are, folks. The Eagle has landed, and as the space program continues in the 21st century, we're continuing on to Mars. There's no question about that. 2024, potential new lunar landing. But back in the day, this engine is what got everybody up to this planet. And what's going to be happening, you think, for Mars in the future? You hear all these different technologies.
Well, we've got several different types of propulsion technologies that are being developed, being perfected. This engine represents an earlier generation of engines. This is a liquid propellant, open power cycle, regeneratively cooled rocket engine, and regeneratively cooling is actually forced convection. So this engine was not super efficient. It did have quite a bit of thrust. This is an H1 engine, and it developed about 200,000 pounds of thrust, burning liquid oxygen and purified RP1, it's kerosene. So this was an early engine. This started to be developed in about 1958. Actually, 58 is a very good year for the space program, not just because I was born that year, but nonetheless, a really important engine because this engine served on the early Apollo flights on the Saturn I and Saturn 1B launch vehicles. So a lot of testing was done with these engines to prepare us for the moon missions.
And consequently, again, even more medical benefits from these fuel pumps resulted in artificial heart pumps for people, pacemakers, wheelchairs that can be commanded by speech. So even disabled people in the future might also be participants, in the space program because of zero gravity. And now, as we approach the world of electricity, electrical turbines, to who knows what kind of fusion machines or anti-gravity machines that we're going to be developing to get us to these far reaches of the universe. Well, here at the Armstrong Air and Space Museum, you can learn those things. So stay with us, folks. Well, folks, we hope you enjoyed this tour of the Armstrong Air and Space Museum here in beautiful Wapakoneta, Ohio. Greg Brown, you've been great taking us around some of the exhibits. It gives you that real feel of being on some of these missions. And again, let's tell our audience a little bit. You guys are going to be open. You got a special event in July.
Yes, every July we have an annual Summer Moon Fest, which we use to celebrate the landing on the moon. And of course, this year is the year after the 50th, so we don't anticipate quite the large crowds we had last year, but it'll still be well attended.
And it's handicapped accessible for anybody who may have a disability.
Yes, our museum was built, fortunately, years ago with ramps in both galleries, so we are entirely wheelchair accessible.
And it's quite a theater you guys have for very special presentations.
We have a theater in which we show a 28-minute movie on Apollo 11, as well as being able to hold various presentations and lectures throughout the year.
And you're doing some STEM teaching here in the classroom as well.
Thankfully, the Armstrong family agreed to allow us to name our new STEM Inspiration Center the Neil Armstrong STEM Inspiration Center. So we are able to actually reach out to a lot of school groups, scouting groups, and give them STEM education.
Well, this is definitely an exciting tour. It's a great place to come for the family. In fact, if you want to spend a weekend, there's a nice Holiday Inn and Suites right next door. Brad Will, the general manager there, will glad to keep a light on for you. So, folks, come on down to the Armstrong Aerospace Museum here in Wapakoneta, Ohio. Thanks for staying with us. Thanks for staying tuned, folks. And we had to stop here for a moment because we have a future astronaut. Her name's Lucy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Lucy, you're here at the Armstrong Air and Space Museum today. And did you find anything exciting?
I saw a moon rock.
Really? All the way back from the moon. Could you imagine flying to the moon someday?
Yeah.
Maybe you're going to be one of those future scientists that we need.
Yeah.
Yes, you will. Well, I know Neil Armstrong would be very, very happy that you came here today. So we'd like to say, folks, bring your kids on down to this great museum. They'll be inspired just like Lucy was. Folks, thanks for staying with us. Doug Damon against my name. And as we were just coming into the museum, we already found a future astronaut for the 21st century. Your name is?
Christian.
Thanks, Christian. And we happened to meet you as we're heading into the museum. And you like space, don't you?
Mm-hmm. I know about planets, stars, and the galaxies and the black holes, even our planet.
Would you like to be an astronaut, do you think, someday?
Yes.
Well, as you know, Neil sitting next to you, he dreamed about being an astronaut. He fulfilled that dream. Did you notice this?
Yes, and I wish I could go to the moon like him.
Well, maybe you might go to the Mars like he did, huh?
He was the Apollo 11 first man to the moon.
And you learned that today, didn't you?
Yes.
Well, we're so grateful that you have these dreams because mankind might rely on you in the future, okay?
Yes, and I could see about space because my brain taught me all about this.
Well, you learned some things today at the museum, didn't you?
Yes.
Wonderful. We will see you on the planet Mars, all right, in the 21st century. Stay with us, folks. Thank you, folks, for staying with us here at the Armstrong Air and Space Museum. Beautiful Wapakoneta, Ohio. Doug Damon's my name. And I'm here with Logan, who is an essential part of the museum's operations and the educational aspects of what is taking place here at the museum, especially with the Armstrong Explorers. Thanks, Logan.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Indeed. And you do such a good work here on these displays, as our audience has seen. These are authentic displays, and Neil Armstrong was pretty adamant about the authenticity of them.
Yeah, so one of the main reasons the museum was founded, the museum was actually founded before Neil went into space. But he was a big fan of education. He always believed in education, even before he became an astronaut. his father said that he always intended to become an educator. You could always see Neil reading books and doing experiments. So one thing that we really wanted to add into the museum was that sense of that spark, that wonder that Neil had, and we wanted to see that in the faces of children when they come into the museum as well. So I think we do a pretty good job of that, and that we're always expanding on that as well.
Indeed. And for a lot of us in southeastern Michigan, we're always looking to take our grandkids places or our children, and this is just a wonderful place to do that. You have certain hours I know that you operate, but you do have special educational groups like the Armstrong Explorers that meet here.
Yeah. So throughout the seasons, we have different Armstrong Explorers. So it's a group of kids that they come to. It's sort of like an after-school program as well. So they do sort of STEM-related projects that help expand the mind in the field of the sciences. Sometimes we'll do rocket workshops, or we do little experiments that relate back to either aerospace or the STEM field or engineering. Kids are the most curious people of all. So we try to embrace that curiosity and relate it back to things that Neil was also curious about. Neil, as a young kid, he loved model planes. So that's one of the main reasons why we talk about aviation in general. So we've added that into those types of concepts.
Indeed. And also the fact that the museum has something about an outreach aspect. Folks could potentially stream these different events and forums that take place here.
I'm one of the main people in charge of what is the LRV, which is the Lunar Rover. So we're working on a program right now to help see what we can do. We can bring the Lunar Rover to different outreach programs, things like that. And we're even going to use it in certain parades as well. So it's just an interesting thing where you're like, wow, that's a Lunar Rover, in a parade. So, and that sort of makes kids ask questions. Well, how does a car, work on the moon? What do they use? How do they inflate tires or things like that? So, and that goes back to the idea of that curiosity and sparking that innovation.
Sure, and that's still present today out there in America with these youngsters who will lead the way in the 21st century in space exploration, just like Neil did. And can they go on a particular website? How would you best inform our audience about how they can get up to date as to what's happening here at the museum or educational programs?
Yeah, so we have our website, which is www.armstrongmuseum.org, and then we have a link that is for education. And so what we do is break it down into things like overnights, outreach, homeschools, and then we just have different buttons that you can choose so you can tailor your education experience to that. So.
Wonderful. Well, for the educators out there, certainly where you can find an excellent field trip, just get a hold of Logan here at the Armstrong Air and Space Museum. Stay with us, folks. Welcome back, folks, and we hope you enjoyed that interview with Logan and the fine work that they do here on keeping these displays authentic. And I'm sure some of you may have noticed the unique design of the Armstrong Air and Space Museum. Scott, who's the facilities manager, is going to give us a little insight about this type of futuristic design and what it was actually meant for. Thanks, Scott.
When the design was being thought up, this is what they thought a futuristic moon base would look like.
But originally this could be a potential design for a future moon base.
Yeah, exactly.
Are there any unique features that you might tell us about as far as how that could be accomplished on the moon, or is it something that has to be totally fabricated?
I would think it would have to be totally fabricated to specs on the design for the moon and what their needs are.
Well, I know I'm going to recommend NASA that Scott, you be the facilities engineer on this new moon building that we can get you launched to. What do you think?
That'd be great.
Stay with us, folks, here at the Armstrong Air and Space Museum.